Greetings, gamers! Welcome to the fifth entry to my tier list series. I've already done Thracia, both generations of genealogy, as well as Echoes, and now it is on to Sacred Stones. Yes, I am moving in the order of favorites. So after this will be the abysmally long-winded, character-filled Shadow Dragon. And I mean long-winded as in has a lot of characters, particularly. Nothing really else to say besides that. So I love these tier lists because I love delving deep into the units that I use and why I use them in each particular game. If you haven't figured out by now, I'm all about a lot of utility and pre-promotes. I do like some growth units. There are some obvious exceptions to this. I do like Merida. I love Merida. One of my favorite combative units in Thracia. But I will concede to the fact that there are a lot better units than her just at base. And it's why Dean is much higher rank than she is in the list, because he just has more utility, more power, better bases. He even still has decent growths, and even if he had 0 in all his growths, you could still make his growth fantastic with scrolls. So the fact of the matter is Thracia is just kind of an interesting case. When it comes to the Sacred Stones, there's a little bit of a different parameter for how I'm going to be rating the units. And in S tier, you can see Seth standard. A tier, almost Seth. B, barely Seth. C, squire of Seth. Yes, I know that's misspelled. Just a simple little joke. And D, don't know who you are. So these are the ranks of my particular Sacred Stones tier list, and it kind of already spoils one of the characters per se, but that's besides the point. I'm actually going to move straight into this with an immediate B tier for Erica. So Erica is actually not at all a bad lord in the franchise, and it's because she's in a game that gives her a lot of opportunities to grow. There's not a lot of instances where movement is king in Sacred Stones. Sacred Stones has much smaller maps than either of Fire Emblem 7 or Fire Emblem 6, especially Fire Emblem 6. Oh my gosh. They tried making a genealogy in Game Boy fashion, and yet, you still only have one castle to seize per chapter. That game, better as it may be than any of the modern garbage that's being shoveled in down our throats, it still is an abysmal wreck, in my humble opinion. Also better than, like, FE1, 2, and 3, but still, I'm moving besides the point. We're talking about Sacred Stones here. Erica is an amazing unit once trained. Once promoted, once trained, she's actually fantastic, especially if you go the Erica route. If you do not go the Erica route, I would venture to say that she's a C rank unit, or a C tier. I'm not going to be rating units based on route. I'm going to be rating units based on both routes combined and like an average between the two. And like considering potential as well as bases. For Echoes, I primarily considered bases more than potential because a lot of units have really wacky potential given the fact that the pitchfork exists in that game, especially with DLC, and the fact that you can grind in that game. So I really, really heavily decided to go in towards bases over potential growths. I'm still going to be doing more of that in this game because grinding is still a thing of Sacred Stones. Sacred Stones takes a hint off of Gaiden, which then, Gaiden is the original of Echoes. So these games are very grind heavy capable. I do not grind them. I do, do the dungeons once just to play through them and have a good time, but I don't grind them. Typically it's usually post game or stuff like that, unless it's necessary for the story like Echoes is. Now, particularly in this game, I am going to be setting out that parameter that yes, it's going to be bases over growths. I'm going to look at base over potential, even though in Genealogy and in Thracia, I didn't really look at that as much because the potential was just way easier to obtain. Paragon mode exists. Paragon scroll can be given to anybody. Paragon sword can be given to anybody who can wield swords, even if that unit cannot fight. You can still get, like, ballista experience points. 2 ballista will level you up. So the fact of the matter is that, like, in this game where grinding is incentivized almost, I have to look more at the bases. Erica at her base is not a good unit. She's okay, barely, Seth. She's a B tier, and that's calculating all of what she's at. Like, not just her base, but her potential as well, because I will still factor that in. It's not like I'm throwing that totally to the wind. She is not the best lord in this game, though. That's going to be left to a later discussion. Seth, I almost wanted to make like a double S tier where only Seth belonged in that tier. The reason why I'm not going to do that is because I am not one of the people who actually believes that Seth is the only good unit in this game, or that Seth is automatically the best unit in this game and nobody else can compare. I do actually believe there's a couple of units that do compare to Seth. It's just that Seth is very powerful. And there's a lot of things in Sacred Stones that conspire to make him powerful, right? The first 8 chapters, particularly in the code of the game, make it so that your pre-promoted units, like Seth, gain more experience points than they normally would. Just the first 8 chapters. So this means that Seth can steamroll these chapters, gain more levels than he actually would, and be even higher level. And a lot of people do this. It's perfectly viable. I remember watching a couple of different discussions, or listening to it, I should say, about how in FE8 you don't need healing. You just need good combat, and Seth is literally best combat in the game. And I really find that to be weird. I remember seeing a tier list a long time ago. This was years ago. That basically put all of the healers and staff wielders in like D tier or E tier or C tier at best because they weren't Seth. And I'm just like thinking, man, you must never play Sacred Stones on anything but the easiest possible difficulty if you think you can blow through this game without healing. I'm just throwing it out there. Even if you are buying elixirs constantly and throwing it on a character like Seth, you're not beating the game with Seth alone. You're just not. And if you do, it's going to be extremely tedious. And I don't care what you say, think, believe, or feel. It's going to be extremely tedious, and you're going to have to spend pretty much every other turn using an elixir or a vulnerary. Besides that, he has a very limited inventory, right? There's enough enemies on some maps where he's just not going to KO them all with a single inventory full of javelins or whatever. So I kind of beg to differ. I really do think that Seth is amazing. He's the best unit in this game. In fact, he's the best Jagan in the series. I think even better than Titania. That's why I give the archetype the name Seth, because Titania is just not the best Seth. She is the second best, but she's also the only other one, in my humble opinion. So, with that being said, he goes into immediate S tier. What else is there to say about him? He's a high movement paladin with great weapon ranks, fantastic stats, amazing growth rates. They're better than some of the growth units in the game. And he has so much potential because he's level 1, and even at level 1 he gets things done. But he has 19 levels to grow, and that's just insane as well. Now, going on to good old Franz. So some people will put Franz in A tier because people think that Franz is like an immediate Seth Jr. I really kind of disagree with this. I actually think that Seth, or Franz, is a B tier, barely Seth. After Franz promotes, we're talking like 5, 6, 7 chapters down the road, Franz is as good as Seth was when Seth first began in the game. Do you see the problem here? Seth begins the game in the prologue with his stats, with his capabilities, with his contributions. Franz doesn't. He's not Seth Light. He's not almost Seth. He's barely Seth. Once he gets promoted, he's actually a fantastic unit. It's just like with Erica. Erica and Franz, I think, are on similar pages. I think the only thing that's obviously wrong with Erica is the fact that she can't use really any good range sword. There's a couple of range swords in this game. I think rune swords you can obtain, let alone the fact that you can obtain a single wind sword, but that's creature campaign only. You can buy light brands at some point. And at that point, she actually is pretty fantastic because magical resistance in this game is kind of terrible. But still, javelins are better. Franz is obviously a better paladin than he is a great knight. I'm not really going to delve too far into the opposing options of like what would Franz be in a tier, what tier would he be if he was a great knight compared to paladin. I'm just going to look at overall rankings. I would say he's better as a paladin, but I'm a sucker for Great Knight. I love Great Knight. It's actually my favorite class in FE8, not because it's good. I just like the way it looks. I like the weapon utility. My favorite, well, I would say my favorite class is actually Berserker, but following that is probably Great Knight. After that is Gilliam. I'm going to put him in Don't Know Who You Are. So the reason why I'm doing this is because Gilliam is like an absolute unnecessary unit. You have Seth. Not only do you have Seth, but you have Franz. Franz is not tanky like Gilliam. Gilliam is useful in that matter. I bench Gilliam pretty much the moment that you get him. And the reason why is because he's an armor knight. Now, in FE8, he has a bit better. He has it a bit better than in some other games, especially FE7 or FE6. And the reason why that is because the maps are smaller, and he will get Great Shield upon promotion to General. Granted, I would rather promote him to Great Knight because Great Knight's a cool class and it's just better. I actually kind of wish that Great Knight also had a skill to differentiate the two more, or not that Great Knight had a skill. I wish that General had bows. I don't know why I was saying that. I don't think Great Knight needs a skill. I think Great Knight might need more movement than it has. I can see why you wouldn't necessarily want to do that because you don't want to widen the gap even more between the choice of General and Great Knight. But if Great Knight, or if General had both bow and Great Shield, I think it would be arguably better as a choice to pick because bows are pretty fun. And you don't get too many good bow units in this game, unfortunately. Moving on to Vanessa. So Vanessa is an A tier unit just because of her utility. I don't think her combat's any good until pretty much where she's getting to promotion level. If you add that up, like her eventually down the road, like she's going to be as good as Seth. Also be a flyer at the same time. And flyers are pretty great in this game. Flyers are pretty great in all of the GBA titles because of Rescue. Rescue is amazing. Anytime that you have flyers and rescue, flyers utility is amazing. In genealogy, for instance, flyers do not have the rescue utility. Because of this, they're actually kind of terrible units. They don't really have anything going for them. They don't have road bonuses. They just have their flat movement. They can't rescue anybody. They can get to some objectives better than other units, and they can get to some objectives where other units can't. And I particularly am thinking of the Meteor Mages in the Yi Desert in Chapter 5. Those are a pretty obvious example where only Aaron can reach. But in this game, it's totally different, right? Flyers have utility. I would dare say that Vanessa's probably the best flyer in this game, and it's because you get her so early. I'm probably going to be ranking some of the other flyers in A as well, just because of how good flying is, but in the grand scheme of things, Vanessa is the best flyer. I think she's a potential candidate for S tier. The only problem is she doesn't start out as good as Seth, and that's just... It's just not viable to put her up there. Now, for C tier, the very first member of that is going to be Mulder, the man himself, a good old healer. I actually think this unit's fantastic if you promote him into a bishop. Fantastic, because bishops are amazing. I think combatively, bishops are the best class in this game. the best class in this game, better than everybody else. Not even a second choice. I wouldn't even say flyers are as good. And the reason why that is because of Slayer. Slayer makes it so that all of their weapons, so all of the light magic that they possess, is effective against all, so triple might, against all of the monsters in this game. Because almost all of the scarier enemies in this game are monsters, and almost all of them use dark magic. In fact, or all of the magic ones use dark magic. What this means is that bishops are kind of like a no-brainer. They are the best combative class in this game. The problem is that you don't get any pre-promoted bishops in Sacred Stones, and all of your units that you would get to be a bishop have a long haul to get there. Mulder's no exception to this. He is a level 1, I believe, and he needs to heal 50 billion times before he gets to the point where he's capable of being a bishop. And that's even if you promote him at level 10. It's just a grind. If he was closer, like let's say he was level 10 or level 8, somewhere in that vicinity, I would probably bump him immediately up to B tier, maybe even A tier, because Bishop is that good. Ross is going into D tier. There's a lot of people who like the trainees in this game. I'm not one. Not only do I not like the trainees in this game, I find them to be a bit abysmal because all of them have very, very terrible growths. They do have a third class, basically, so, they're 3 tier in this game. They're basically the villagers of Echoes. But they're just not good. They start out so very poor. Most of them don't even have good enough growth rates to subvert the fact that they're so poor in their statistics, and their promotional gains, especially from their trainee class to whatever first class you choose, is just not good. It's just not good. It's like +1 in some stats, and it doesn't make up for anything in that vicinity. Garcia, a little bit of an interesting take here. So Garcia, I would actually put in B tier. The reason why I would put him in B tier is because he's an axe wielder that's actually pretty good upon joining. And hand axes are pretty good in this game. They're not as good as javelins. Javelins are the best 1-2 range weapon of the GBA games. And I would say lances overall are kind of like the best overall weapons in the GBA games. Some people don't necessarily agree. Some people say swords are still good, axes are still good. I think the weapons are more balanced. It's just that lances are better because javelins are better than hand axes. And with this in mind, he's not as good as somebody like Franz after promotion, but I think Garcia is way better at start than Franz is, and he's a very good particular unit to train. I think he can either go warrior or hero. I would say that warrior is better just because of bow utility, and because warrior has better caps, and better animations. Let's just throw that out there. Warrior has awesome animations. Heroes crit animations, and some of his animations are pretty cool, I will grant that, but just not as good as Warrior, just not. And speaking of bows, Nami, she's gonna go into D tier. Don't even know who you are. An archer in a GBA game, who starts off very poor, incapable of really getting kills ever, even against some like Pegasus Knights and Flyers, and then also has not the greatest of growth rates and very poor weapon ranks. You see where I'm going with this. Archers are actually bad in most Fire Emblem games. There are a couple of instances where they're not good, or where they're not bad. Like they're passable to good, depending on what part you're in FE10. They're actually decent in FE4. They're very good in FE5. Not like amazing units, but they're very good, especially with the Brave Bow in hand. They're okay in the Arcanea games, and they're busted in Echoes and Gaiden. But for the most part, most games, they're not good. And unfortunately, the GBA games, they're not good. They're not it. Nemi is just not a good unit. I really don't appreciate this unit whatsoever, combatively or utility-wise. C tier for Calm. Squire to Seth. The man is good for utility, not good for anything else. Combat for this unit is basically impossible unless you grind and or spoon feed him kill after kill after kill after kill, and then finally give him a promotional item. I think he doesn't need the Fel contract in this game. He might. It might be like the Ocean Seal is fine, or the Earth Seal, or whatever. I'm not entirely sure. All I know is it's an expensive promotion. Rogue, I think, is better utility-wise. A lot of people will say Assassin is. I don't think Assassin's Silencer makes up for the fact that Assassins don't get a crit bonus. And so you have to use Killing Edges to ever see Silencer proc. And I don't think that makes up for the fact of pick. I think pick is too good. Some people would say, chest keys exist, door keys exist. I don't care. I think pick is just better. Not let alone the fact that there's also steal. I don't think assassins can steal. I'm not sure on that. I know assassins can use lockpicks, which is cool, so I guess you could still use that, but I sell all my lockpicks. That's what they're good for. Once I have somebody who has pick, that is. The fact of the matter is I personally don't find this unit to be combatively any good. His utility is okay, but also not necessary, because in the GBA games, most of the time you do get stuff to help you open up the chests and doors without these kinds of units. So really he only has Thief utility. I guess you could say he would probably be a candidate for B tier because Thief utility is still good, but it's not good enough for me to bump him up, unfortunately. Calm is a C tier unit. All right, Arthur. I really think I want to put him in A tier. So the reason why I'm putting Arthur in A tier is because he's basically what Molder needed to be, in a way. So Molder would need to be like level 8 or 9 or even 10 to be as good, in as good of a position as Arthur is. Because even though, or Arthur, even though Arthur is not that high of level, I think he's either level 3 or 4, and he does take a little while to get promoted, he still can just use light magic and attack and whatnot. So he's not a healer, but he's actually a really decent mage. He has very good growth rates, and when you turn him into a bishop, I would say he's probably your best bishop in this game. Like, bar none. I think he is literally the best bishop that you have access to. There's Molder, Natasha, and Arthur. Molder's pretty good. He's actually like the most tanky, physically defensive of the three. Natasha is kind of like, I don't even use that unit. I'm going to throw it out there. I don't think she would ever be a good bishop, just based off of the fact that she doesn't really have great growths. But then again, bishop is still a pretty fantastic class in the sense that it still grants some amazing power against all of the enemies of this game that are, creatures. I think Archer is actually even better than Loot. So Loot is a unit that I'm going to put in B tier. Loot does not have access to Bishop, and really what I would put her in is Mage Knight, because Mage Knight is just infinitely better than Sage. I do not think that Loot is as good as Archer. So the problem with Loot is that you have to go Sage with her if you want her to have Weapon Triangle against, like, the Gorgons, for instance, especially with their stone and stuff like that. They're a very serious and huge threat in this game, especially on the higher difficulties. And I'm not going to go Sage with her. I'm going to go Mage Knight, because Mage Knight just has the movement, and the movement is kind of really good, especially because it does have utility, even though this game has, like, Canto Minus. It doesn't even have, like, the base version of Canto that you would come to know in a game like, I want to say, I guess this would be Canto, right? It is Canto, in the sense that it's all you get is if you do a non-attacking action, you can move the rest of your leftover movement. So she can rescue and move, or she can use like a vulnerary and move, or use an item or move, a stat booster or move, open a door and move, so on and so forth. So still there is utility to the rescue mechanic and her being a Mage Knight rather than a Sage, and I think that little bit of utility is better than her having light magic. She's not going to have Slayer. It's not going to be effective. It's just weapon triangle. And that's useful, but not so necessary. Natasha is going to be immediate C tier. I actually think Natasha is better than Mulder concerning healing when she joins, because she has... Well, no, I want to take... I got to take that back. I think Natasha is better because she has a better staff rank, if I'm not mistaken. But she's not really better because she doesn't have better growths or bases than Mulder. And Mulder comes at a much sooner chapter. So I do think that Mulder is better, but only slightly. Natasha has like other assets to her and things that she offers to the table. All three of these units, Mulder, Archer, and Natasha, if you're going to use them, there is no reason not to put them into Bishop. And use all three of them. The whole using a single class or like one of each class thing is just kind of abysmal in Fire Emblem. Use whatever you need, and really having 3 bishops, 3 staff-wielding bishops that can also just destroy pretty much any enemy in the game, any scary enemy in the game. All the Cyclops are gone, the Gorgons can't fight you, the Shadow Shot wielding, Stone wielding Moguls and Gorgons, they're just not a threat to these units. These units are insane, and especially when you verse Draco zombies, being able to have a triple effective weapon against them is pretty good, especially magic based, because they have a lot less resistance than defense. Granted, the dragon weapons are so plentiful in this game that there's really no utility that they have over pretty much anybody else concerning fighting the Draco zombies. Now, Joshua is actually an interesting unit here. I would hazard to put this man in B tier. So he doesn't have a good promotion because it's just Swordsmaster. Swordsmasters aren't insane in this game. He doesn't have like good 1-2 range, reliable 1-2 range, or cost-effective 1-2 range, I should say. But he does have access to it in this game a little bit more than most other games in the franchise, especially the GBA games, because you do at some point get to buy light brands. I don't remember if that's Creature Campaign or not. That's kind of a little bit tough there. It might be just Creature Campaign. Even if it's not, even if it is just Creature Campaign, he's still a good combative unit. I would say that Joshua is probably one of the only one-range locked units for the most part. Obviously he does have some options that I would put in B tier or higher, because he's pretty good. Swordsmasters are pretty good. His growths are good. His promotion is pretty good. He's technically like a side main character in this game. It's funny because there's 2 main lords in this game, but there's a few other characters in this game that are kind of like main lords. Joshua is one. He's basically the Prince of Johanna. And then you have La Rochelle, who is the Princess of Roston. And these all play like a key point to the story to some degree, but yet they're not also lords. I think his start is pretty good too, having a killing edge, being reasonably leveled. He can promote relatively quick. I would say he's a pretty good boss killer. Swordsmasters usually are, especially if you're fighting like an armored unit. You have like a armor slayer or pretty much any other unit with a killing edge, so on and so forth. Great unit. Personally, great unit. Now, I have a little bit of a tough time rating Ephraim. So Ephraim, I kind of want to put in S tier. In fact, I think I'm going to. And it's not because he has immediately as good of a start as Seth. I think his start is obviously a little bit less than that. But he's immediately capable of using the best 1-2 range physical weapon in the game, which is javelins. And he has good stats, good growths, a fantastic promotion that you get to choose when that occurs once you get the promotional item for him. And he comes with one of the best preferential weapons in the game for a lord, and that is the Regenleaf. At least that's how I think it's pronounced. It might be Rainleaf, but typically I just pronounce it Reagan Leaf. So the Reagan Leaf is a 10 mighted weapon that has crit on it, but also is effective against armor and horseback units. So he has a 30 might weapon. This is such good utility. I struggle putting Ephraim in S or A tier because I know that he's not mounted. He doesn't have the same power immediately as Seth. But if you look just a little bit beyond that, he's one of the best lords in the series. I would definitely say he's top 5 best lords in the series. You know, there's obviously Sigurd, then there's obviously Seliph, and then there's Leif. And then maybe Hector could be argued as 4. I would say maybe Ephraim is actually at 4, and then maybe Hector at 5, just because Ephraim gets a way better promotion. I would say Hector's probably 5. Yeah, Ephraim's probably the 4th best lord in the series, and there is some, greatness to that. I always go Ephraim route, but even if you go Erica route, which I do, well, I don't necessarily always go Ephraim route. When you do go Erica route, even when you get Ephraim back later on, he's still fantastic. As long as you've trained him at least a little bit, he's still fantastic. And the crazy thing about that is that even if you haven't trained him, if you play the game like I do, where you only ever go through the Tower of Valny once before the creature campaign, if you go through it at all, which is how I play through it, it's either once or nothing. If I decided not to train up Ephraim because I wanted to give that experience points to other units, then I would just take him through the Tower of Valny. Now, that's not grinding. I just go straight through from start to finish, and then I'm just done with that. I guess it could be considered grinding, but I don't go over and over and over and over and over again. And that's if I go. Because, like I've said before, and I've made this very well, readily understood, I don't like grinding in Fire Emblem. I actually find it to be kind of a heinous waste of your time, because most of the time, most of the games can be beaten with 0 growths and just pre-promotes. And I mean, that's more than enough for me. So he's going in S tier. Now Kyle and Ford, they don't have so good of a situation. I would definitely say they're B tier, both of them. But that's not necessarily saying a lot, because they are better statistically than Franz at start, as well as they have similar or better growth rates in some areas. And I think they even have a little bit better weapon ranks, but they start out a little bit later, and then you also don't get them back for a little while. Man, I almost want to move them down to C tier, because I don't think they're as good as Franz. I really do not. I know this is going to sound kind of weird, but I just don't think they're as good as Franz. And the issue is that they have a little bit of an availability issue. But they're still Cavaliers that do turn into Paladins. You're not going to turn them into Great Knights. They're fantastic when they're Paladins. They're pretty much on par with Franz and Seth at that point when they get there. The problem is by the time they get there, you're over halfway through the game. Now, Orson is kind of a weird case. He is as good as Seth, if not better than Seth at base, but you only get him for 1 chapter. I kind of can't put this against him though, because the issue is that in the chapter he's in, he's your most powerful unit. He can easily solo the chapter. He's better than Seth at start. And I do like his story arc. I know that's not really utility-wise anything to do with the character it's himself, but I will say he does actually have a lot of utility in the chapter that you use him in, and that is rescuing Ephraim and taking Ephraim down the pathways, getting him to the throne faster, so on and so forth. So not only is he the best combat unit you have, besides maybe Ephraim fighting armors and horsebacks, mounted units, I would say he's deserving of S tier for his singular chapter. But obviously, because Orson is only available in 1 chapter, I think D tier is where he actually belongs. So there's an argument for both. He could be put in S tier because he's as good and if not better than Seth when he joins, but you only get him for 1 chapter. So D tier. Tana is next. I think Tana is a great unit. I think she is easily A tier material. because flyers are good. They're exceptionally good. And I would say, I'm going to say this over and over and over and over again. Flyers are good in the GBA titles. Very good in the GBA titles. And Sacred Stones, I think they're even better because, yes, the maps are bigger in FE6 and in FE7 than FE8, but there's a lot of very interesting terrain and like things that this game does with its maps and map design that allows for flyers to really shine, and I really like that. So Tana is going to go into A tier. I really think that if we were talking about combat, Tana is like easily a D tier when she joins because she's basically on par with Vanessa at the point at which she joins, and that's just shameful, abysmal even. And then another recruit, obviously going into immediate D tier, and that is Amelia. So Amelia is a unit in which is good if you go the Cavalier Paladin route. And you could even like argue Great Knight is pretty decent for her. Great Knight's good on any of these units that can turn into either a Paladin or a Great Knight. You're only losing one movement for better stats all around. The speed increase that you have as a Paladin over a Great Knight is not that big a deal, let alone the fact that you also get access to axes in Great Knight. I'm not trying to make a case for Great Knight being better, because I do know the 1 point of movement does make them better than Great Knights, Paladins, per se. But you could go either way. I don't think Amelia is good in anything, unfortunately. Very next unit to rate is an A tier, Enos. Enos is or Innes, I guess it would be Innes, is the Prince of Freya, and one of my favorite bow units I think he's probably my favorite bow unit in the GBA titles. I think the only one who comes close to the same level that I would give respect of is Louise, but that's only because I love her pairing with Pent, and I love their support. I love her statistics at join. She's like very much supposed to be a mage killer. Innes is not really any of that, but he's much stronger than her, and he has much better potential than her. And I really like him. I typically use him because the Nidhogg is a fantastic weapon. Throwing that away just because you don't like archers is kind of a silly take. Now, granted, some people will say that Nemi will be better if you do train her, but Innes is like perfectly viable for the rest of the game at his base. In fact, if he had access to 1-2 range and not just 2 range, I would be putting him in S tier because he's just that good. Garrick is next on the list, and he's going into A tier. I think that Garrick is a candidate for another S tier unit. I don't put him in S tier because he doesn't really have good promotions. Ranger is better, I will grant, than Hero. And though Hero makes more thematic sense, Ranger does give him more movement, as well as the fact that, the rescue utility is there. And I have to say that in the grand scheme of things, maybe he is an S tier unit. So he's capable of promoting immediately. And upon promotion to either Ranger or Hero, he's going to be as good, if not better, than all of the rest of your combat stats or combative units at the moment. So I actually think that I think I'm going to put him in S tier for his combat. And if you go down the Ranger portion and you do have bows with him, which is good because you can use that for the effectiveness against flyers, and then he has like the rescue utility, which is very good in the GBA titles, as I've said before. I actually think he's an S tier unit by and large. And another S tier unit is going to be Tethys. So Tethys is a no-brainer S tier. I actually think she is the best unit in this game, even better than Seth, and the reason why is because units as good as Seth exist. When you have good units, like fantastic units, dancers become even better than dancers already are. So Tethys is your one and only dancer, and that is incredible. She can make a unit like Seth move again, so he can have 2 actions in the same turn. This is amazing. because, well, it's pretty obviously amazing that she is capable of just supporting units in this kind of manner. And I do really mean it. I do think that Tethys is the best unit in this game. I think usually the Dancer is candidate for one of the best units in the game. I think the only reason why she is best unit in this game, like bar none, is because Seth and other units like Ephraim are just so darn powerful. Because of their power, she is more powerful. I know that doesn't immediately make sense, but if you really think about it, she is making these monsters move again. Ephraim, after promotion, is an absolute monster. Ephraim, Erica, with the Sigmund and Siglind, are monsters. It's just incredible. It's just incredible. To have a dancer and not acknowledge the dancer's power is kind of a bit of an extreme shame. And I feel like she is very underrated in this, because a lot of people will say that in Sacred Stones particularly, dancers aren't as necessary in other games because the maps aren't as big, and I think that that's a very bad take. Then there is Marissa. Unfortunately, another D tier unit. So Marissa is a bad unit because she's basically Joshua with lesser bases, lesser growths, and joins like 5 chapters, 5, 6, 7, 8 chapters after he does. Why this is the case, I'll never know. It's actually funny because a lot of people advocate for her being an assassin or made into an assassin, and I think there's a better case for her becoming an assassin or Joshua becoming an assassin than somebody like Colm. And the reason why that is because their options are Swordsmaster and Assassin. Swordsmasters have an innate crit, though, so there is kind of like the issue of you're trading innate crit, which is a better chance of killing an enemy, for Silencer, which is only a 50% chance to proc if you get a crit. So you have to use something like a killer weapon. So I actually think that Swordsmaster is the better option. It's just that because both of them are comparable and both of them do have their niche utility and uses, I think that you can kind of trade it out and say, like, okay, I'm going to go with Assassin this time, and it's not really that big a deal. Unfortunately, regardless of what way you go with Marissa, she's not a good unit. And that leaves her to the I don't know who you are tier. Next is Le Rochelle. So Le Rochelle is an unfortunate case. She's a C tier. She starts out at level 3. She's a troubadour, so she cannot attack. She has 70... She basically has to use 70 heal staves, right, in order to get to level 10 to early promote. And by the time she's used all that, it's going to basically be the end of the game. You're going to have to mindfully use at least like 10, like get her a single level each and every chapter in order to get her promoted in a reasonable amount of time. She joins halfway through the game. I do still like her. In fact, typically I still use her because I like her character. I like her supports. I like her healing. Her healing is helpful. I do like her once she promotes. The problem is that she has the option of Mage Knight and Valkyrie, and the obvious option is Valkyrie because of Weapon Triangle, but the better option is technically Mage Knight because the weapons are better and she's not going to get anything like Slayer upon promoting to a Valkyrie. So it's kind of a hard choice with her. She is a good unit once promoted, but because of the way how long it takes her to get there, I really think she is easily a C tier unit. In fact, I would say she's a D tier unit if it wasn't for the fact that she's mounted. If she wasn't mounted, if she was just another Natasha or Mulder at this point in the game, I might even make it like an L tier for her. Loser, Le Rochelle, because that's how bad she would be. Now, Dozla, this is an interesting case. I am seriously considering putting him in S tier. And so many people would probably look at me and say, Gamer Man, you are off your rocker. Now I'm gonna hold my biases back a little bit and I'm gonna put him in A tier. I use Dozla every time. Every playthrough, every game I play, of Sacred Stones, I use Nuzla. And the reason why is because, again, he's got great supports. I love his character. I love him with La Rochelle. But in game, at base, he's perfectly fine to be used for the rest of the game, especially once he's capable of using the Garm. The Garm on this man is insanity. He doesn't have the greatest of growth rates, but he will grow to some extent. Killer Axes on him are amazing. He is a Berserker. Berserkers in the GBA games are insane. I believe he gets, a 15 crit bonus for just being a Berserker. Axes are good weapons. They're not as good as Lances, I've already discussed this, but because Berserkers are so strong, skillful, and speedy, he doesn't care about this. He's an amazing unit, a fantastic unit. And he's the perfect bodyguard for little old La Rochelle. So next is Saleh. Man, this guy's name is so annoying. I almost want to say Sale. I want to say it's Sale, but because of the H, it's probably Saleh. So Saleh. I hate that name because it sounds too close to Sally, and very frankly, we're not in that ignorance. So I'm putting him in S tier. Saleh is a very, very strong character. He is the Pent of this game, basically the Goto of this game. But you receive him a whole lot sooner than you receive an actual Goto, which is super nice. He's got a good staff rank, a good light rank, a good anima rank, and typically what I do with him is when I use him, I give him maxed out light rank rather than anima rank, just because, again, using Ivaldi is better than Excalibur at times. It just depends. Typically, if I'm using like a Mage Knight, I'll use like Excalibur for the Mage Knight, so on and so forth, because I do like trying to have one of every weapon. Typically, the only weapon that I miss out on is Dark, because I almost never use a Dark Magic user in this game. You only get 2, and they're both not good. Dark Magic is okay in this game, but it's not as good as it is in some games, particularly, like FE7. But that's besides the point. Saleh cannot use Dark Magic. He can only use Light, Anima, and Staves. And he's really good at this, really adept at this. He has great utility, great power, a very fantastic unit. He is combatively good straight off the bat. He doesn't need pretty much any levels to be anywhere good for the rest of the game. If you get him to S rank in Anima or S rank in Light, he's going to be able to use either of the Sacred Twin weapons to full extent, or you could even get him to S rank in Staves if you wanted. And he could use the Latoma, and he would be perfectly good at that too, because the Latoma is a staff that heals everybody for all HP and restores all conditions. This is especially useful if you're fighting the Demon King and he decides to sleep all your characters, which has been known to happen on occasion, especially with mine. Ewan. Ewan is immediate D tier. So the reason why Ewan goes into D tier is the same reason why all of the recruits in this game go into D tier. They're bad units. I don't know what to tell you. If you like them, that's perfectly fine. Please do continue to like them. Do not allow other people's opinions about a video game, a non-moral, non-significant, non-politically based issue, video game, to corrupt your mind and make you think that you should just hate the world because not everybody agrees with you. The recruits are bad. I'm not a growth unit kind of guy. In fact, I love my pre-promotes. You're going to see some more pre-promotes getting high ranks for me when necessarily you probably wouldn't see other people give those ranks to these units. Like, for instance, Saleh. Who would put Saleh with Seth? Or even Ephraim with Seth? Or Garrick with Seth? Or Tethys with Seth? Seth is typically in his own tier. This is my own tier list and my own opinions, and Ewan goes in D tier. Don't even know who you are. And the reason why is because the dude is a pupil with statistics worse than Archer or Lute. I think even worse than Natasha, at the point at which he is recruited, and he's recruited halfway through the game. Unfortunately, Grinding is tedious, regardless of whether or not you like it or not. This is objective fact. So in order to raise this unit, you have to go through tedium. And any unit that requires you to go through tedium in order to get that unit to a reasonable level, and I'm not even talking about good, just reasonable, is automatically not a good unit. So unfortunately, he goes there. The very first and only flyer that's going in S tier is Cormag. Cormag is an insane unit. He's basically capable of promoting immediately. He is a Wyvern Rider who can turn into a Wyvern Knight or Lord. I think Knight is the obviously better choice. Lords are fun though because they can use swords as well. I don't think Knight is immediately like an obvious choice because Lords have better statistics in some areas, like for instance strength and defense, and the skill is marginal. It's not going to proc when you want it to, and when it does proc, it's going to be insignificant. So I don't think Wyvern Knight is like an end-all be-all. The speed and the Constitution buff are pretty good at times, but I do think he gets more Constitution from his promotion to Wyvern Lord. I think Wyvern Knight is just a no-brainer for the female flyers because it's just so much better than Falcon Knight. Falcon Knight is still useful because it's still a flyer, but Wyvern Knight is way better. There is a hierarchy of classes after all. Cormag is a great unit. He's both great utility-wise and he's great combat-wise. And knowing this, you kind of have to just put him where he belongs, which is in S tier. And a very interesting take that nobody is going to have besides me is Rennek is an S tier unit. Rennek starts with very good combat-related stats, especially very good resistance. Some of the best resistance base in the entire game, which I absolutely love. So his combat against magic units is actually pretty darn good. He has pick because he's a rogue, and he can steal, and he's very good at stealing. I think that these things, in conjunction with his decent combat and his very good growth rates and his good supports and stuff like that, his good contributions to the story, I think he goes in S rank. Now, there could be argument for him going in A rank. I could definitely see that. A rank or would be a good compromise. There's even argument to put him in B rank because at the end of the day, he's still a rogue. He's not going to ever have like any superior combat compared to somebody like Ephraim or Duzla or something of that nature. But I personally think he is deserving of S tier because of his utility alongside of his combat, and because you don't need to train him for any of this. I love the pre-promotes in Sacred Stones, and I think they're deserving of more love that a lot of people just hate. A lot of people just hate these pre-promotes, especially in Sacred Stones, because they'll say, well, Sacred Stones is an easy game. Yeah, if you're playing on the easiest difficulty. If you're playing on the hardest difficulty, Sacred Stones is not a joke. It's not a joke of a game. It's not the hardest of games in the series, but it is not a joke. You can still easily lose units, you can still easily die, and you do need stuff like healing, unbeknownst to the people who say otherwise. The next unit I have to rate is Dussel. Some people pronounce it Dussel or Dussel. I'm never going to pronounce it that way. It's Dussel, and it's going to be Dussel for the end of time. Dussel is an A tier unit, almost Seth. He is literally Seth's better at his join chapter. The only thing that Seth has better than Dussel is speed, but Dussel has the utility of all three weapon types, swords, lances, axes, good weapon ranks in all three, good bases, decent growths, and is just all in all a fantastic unit. I wouldn't say he's as good as Seth. He's not in the Seth tier for good reason. But I think he's actually a very well slept on pre-promote in this game again, just like Dozla. I think Dussel has a lot of potential and is very good, especially as a filler unit if you need a filler unit, or if you're just going to run pre-promotes, because pre-promotes are good out of the gate. And that's what I love about them. They're good out of the gate. Why don't people love pre-promotes more? Of course, love your growth units. Love all the units in Fire Emblem you can. I don't care. But give some more love to pre-promotes. Unfortunately, the next unit in the game is Null. So I kind of want to put Null in D tier, and that's going to make a lot of people mad. Null is a good unit once trained. If you keep the Hoplon Guard on him, he's never going to have to worry about the fact that he has very poor luck and very poor luck growth and will always be a target for crit and critical weapons, and units that have crit, they will get him eventually. They just will get him. Null is your only viable dark magic user in this game. You do not get an Athos in this game. Saleh is the closest you get to that, and he does not have dark magic. Iwan does join a few chapters earlier than Null, if I'm not mistaken, so Iwan does have that on him. But the problem is you still have to get Iwan to promotion, his first promotion. You have to turn him to a shaman, and I think Null he starts at a level in which he can basically pre-promote. I think Null is actually really deserving of a C tier. Just because he does have dark magic utility, he's very close to promotion if he's not already there. He is usable, he is viable, and he is really the only user of Gleipnir that I would say is worth your time training. Typically, I don't bother with the tome. It would be great to have one of every tome, or one of the sacred weapons, the sacred twin weapons, in a playthrough, and use them all to their fullest. But the unfortunate reality is Null is just not that great. Iwan is not that great. They're the only two options you have for dark magic users. You get them both kind of late in the game. They both have bad stats. They both have bad growths. So it's kind of abysmal. And then there's the discussion about whether you should go Summoner or Druid. I actually think that Druid is an underrated class, but I do know that the power of Summoner's Phantoms means that having both Iwan and Null promoted to a Summoner is actually kind of really broken. Even if this game had like a difficulty 3 or 4 times harder than its highest difficulty, you could breeze through this game with Summoners. Because the issue is, well, Summoners and Bishops. If you had a combination of Summoners and Bishops, you could just summon both your Phantoms and then kill anything with your Bishops. And nothing's ever going to really hurt you or affect you because summons are just that powerful. They take up an attack from your enemies. And that's perfectly awesome. I think that Myrrh, the very next unit to rate, is an S tier unit. Myrrh at base is capable of basically destroying any of the creatures, any of the monsters of all of FE8, except for some of like the Draco zombies, because she's just too weak. She has too low of HP, and the Demon King. But a trained Myrrh is capable of dealing with anything. You can reliably get Myrrh fully trained in 20 or less of her Dragonstone uses, which means you'll have 30 left over. A lot of people like to say that her Dragonstone limits her to being not a good unit. 50 uses of her Dragonstone is more than enough for the entire game. It's more than enough. I don't care what you say, what you think, what you believe, what you feel. 50 uses is more than enough. You're going to have 30 after she's capped. She's going to be so strong that she's going to one-shot everything. That's even if that unit is not a creature, but definitely a creature because she has effectiveness against all of the creatures. Once she's fully trained, she gives a run. She gives the Demon King a run for his money for who's the real boss of the game. She is powerful. She's insane. I think an easy S tier and perhaps one of the best units in this game overall. Once you do get her and train her, because obviously that it does take a little bit of that, but even at base, she still has the utility of basically just annihilating anything you need her to annihilate. And of course, you don't want to waste the Dragonstone on her training to, so that she has less than 30 uses or close to that. You want her to have that 30 uses so that you can continue to use her and have like that use of her, because you cannot Hamurn. I hate this with a burning, fervent passion. You cannot Hamurn the Dragonstone. If you could get more in the creature campaign, I wouldn't even care about this, because the 30 uses beyond the 20 that it takes to get her to max level is more than enough for the rest of the game. But then you can't really like viably use her for the creature campaign. You can't viably use her. Once her stone breaks, she's just done. And I hate that. It's a very unfortunate facet of her, and I do know that it is a big downside of her. But like I said, within the 50 uses, she's going to get her cap, and she's going to have many uses left over, and she's going to one-shot most units she fights, so it's not going to even matter, grand scheme of things. And the final unit to talk about is Cyrene. Cyrene is easily what people would call like one of the worst pre-promotes in this game, and I'll grant that she is one of the worst pre-promotes in the game. But if you look at my tier list here, there is not a single pre-promote that you obtain in this game that is below A tier, and there is a reason for this, except for Orson, but we know why he's there. He would actually be S tier if it wasn't for the fact that I don't like the fact that you can only use him for the one chapter. Cyrene is an A tier unit in my humble opinion. Cyrene is just as good, if not better, than most of your Falcon Knights or Wyvern Knights, female Wyvern Knights, or female, well, obviously female Falcon Knights, so Tana and Vanessa, by the time you get her. She's arguably as good as them, let alone the fact that alongside them, they can perform the Weapon Triangle. Weapon Triangle is insane with them. If you use the Vidofner and like a Dancer, you can have 2 units attacking and critting the Demon King in the same turn. This is insane and very fun. It's incredible utility. You can easily KO Leon in one single round of combat with any one of these using the Vidofner and crit, and that's kind of crazy. The fact that there's people who underrate her so much and would put her unironically in D tier or C tier kind of baffles me to a bit of an extent. Because even though she is a very late game recruitment, she is recruited at Chapter 17, River of Regrets, and also is a Falcon Knight, which is lesser than a Wyvern Knight. I understand this. And is level 10 with not the greatest of bases. She does have pretty good bases, and she actually has pretty good growths. They're not the greatest. They're basically on par with like Seth at like level 8-ish. Maybe like level 5, between 5 and 8. I would still say she's a very good candidate for a user of the Vidofner or the Edholma, and she's a very good filler if you need it. She's a very good flyer. Having more flyers in this game is not particularly bad. In fact, using all 4 of the flyers that are offered to you is pretty fantastic because they are great units. They have great utility. FE8 just overvalues them, and I love that about that. Now, with all that being said, my FE8 Sacred Stones tier list is finished. Humorously, I did not even plan this to end at the Demon King's theme, but that's where I am right now. Ah, man. So, I know that some of my opinions in all of my tier lists are going to be basically hot takes because I like certain units that some people just do not like. I'm big on pre-promotes, I'm big on bases over growths, I'm big on utility alongside combat. That's why Seth is not the only one in S tier. I'm big on the potential as well as the start of certain units. I will give like benefit of the doubt for some units like Ephraim for that. Ephraim is probably more arguably an A tier unit than S tier, but I love him so much. I'm not even kidding when I say he is 4th best Lord in the series. He has to be. Lances are the best in the Game Boy Advance games, and this is definitely no different for Sacred Stones, and he just happens to be a Lance Lord, which is very unique. In fact, I think out of the games that I will harbor any kind of joy to play or whatever, so have you, I think the only other Lance Lord is Eliwood after he promotes and can use lances then, but before then, obviously he cannot. So that's unfortunate for him. But that's my tier list. I do want to thank you for joining me. If you like my content, please upvote and follow, or like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Tell me how you think I did. If you agree with my decisions, or if you disagree, tell me what your placements would be, where you'd put certain characters, if you think that Seth belongs in SS tier, or if he's D tier because you hate pre-promotes and Jagan's stealing your experience points. That's a funny take, but there's people who really do think that way. Um, Either way, I hope you have a great and glorious day gaming.